Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I am recording this during a pharma trade show in New York City, except I'm not in New York City. I'm in a hotel room in Weehawken, New Jersey, a few steps from the ferry across the river. As I say it, I realize we're all a few steps from a ferry across the river, you know? I stay here every year for my New York business events. I don't like trying to sleep with the city noise and all that stuff. And this place also gives me this great view of the sun rising behind the Manhattan skyline. And when I get back in the evenings, late afternoon, evening, I could see the setting sun and golden light reflecting off the buildings and across the river. It's really beautiful. So last year for this show, it's called DCAT Week, Drug, Chemical, and Allied Trades, blah, blah, blah. I was in this hotel when I recorded the intro to my episode with Edith Hall about suicidality in the ancient Greeks, especially the ancient Greek tragedies. And at the time, I told you about how my wife worries about me on these long, boring nights in hotels. Not that I'm going to get into trouble, but, you know. And I talked about suicidality among some of my family members and how I just learned about that right before recording with Edith, and that sort of rocked my world, and how I've never really felt that urge to end it. And I had told my wife this at the time, which is when she told me she was worried about me sitting around in hotel rooms during these business trips. But, you know, choose life, right? So no, I'm not going to do anything drastic on this trip unless you consider, you know, recording a monologue drastic. By the way, and this is all a way of getting around to saying it, there is no guest this week. I've got a couple of April's shows recorded. My scheduling just didn't work out, so there's no guest. I apologize. So yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and if you're in New York for that, especially Midtown where DCAT Week takes place, it is not fun. A lot of people, a lot of green, didn't step in any barf, which is nice. But I was in Midtown for my conference all day long, just hustling from hotel to hotel for meetings with clients, prospective clients, different people. And when I had a little time between sessions, I had this my next one was going to be at the Lotte, New York, which is right across from Rockefeller Center, pretty much. I thought I'd go over and hit McNally Jackson Books because I had about 40 minutes to kill between meetings. Maybe go over to Todd Snyder, look at some clothes, but really, you know, let's say I was going there for the books. Problem was, I forgot that it was St. Patrick's Day and I was going to have to cross Fifth Avenue to get to Rockefeller Center, and the parade scotched those ideas. Bagpipes should have tipped me off, but didn't realize it until I started to get closer to the avenue and thought, no, I'm just going to go back to the hotel and bump into people and have my fourth coffee of the day. I've had a tough time of things lately. I think the winter, the whole fall of the Republic thing, sinus issue that's led to this like weeks-long cluster headache, they've all kind of done me in. And I've copped to that. I've mentioned that in like the newsletter and some of my intros and stuff. So this isn't some great revelation in the moment, but there is that sense of Well, that paradoxical as it sounds, I'm really looking forward to 3+ days of business meetings, even if I'm going to be a bleary wreck, and my voice actually does not sound so bad compared to what it's going to sound like on Thursday. But even if I'm going to be a bleary wreck by the end of all this, because it puts me out in the world, gets me out of myself. I'm here for them. I'm here to understand what's going on in their businesses, their lives, to help them understand what's happening, among their peers, with government policy, all the stuff that I do. Because the thing about getting out in the world like this is that it gets me out in the world. It gets me away from myself. There's no time to get swamped by my thoughts and the automatic undercutting machine, as I call it. That was something from one of the postcards that I was mailing out to someone recently. It's a piece of mining equipment, a 1950s postcard by the automatic undercutting machine, which to me might be the best term for what I do to myself and what a lot of us do to ourselves. Anyway, once I finish all these meetings on Thursday, supposedly at noon, because people keep calling me, now that the show's already started, they're like, oh, Gil, if you have just a half hour, we'd love to get together, even though we've had 2 months to schedule things, but whatever. That finishes at noon. Then I'm getting a subway out to Brooklyn to record next week's show. So there should be a podcast for you next week, provided all goes according to plan. But it really is good for me to talk business with the clients and to talk life with some of the ones that I'm closer with. I've known some of these guys for like 25 years. And even some of the newer folks have become pals. Better than I have any right to expect. I'll put it that way. And some of them care. Some of them know about my health issues, and they ask about that stuff. And some of them I'm open about the mental health side of things, and they appreciate that. And it opens them up to share how tough some of this stuff is. So yesterday was good, but tiring. And I don't sleep well in hotels between the HVAC, the pillows, the blah, blah, blahs, but I sleep better here than I do in New York, so I'll take it. The day before, now yesterday was Monday, that was St. Patrick's. The day before was great too, because I recorded one of April's guests in Brooklyn, Dan Nadel, who has a great biography of Robert Crumb coming out, and you're going to hear this amazing conversation we had mid-April for that. But after seeing Dan, I drove to Chelsea in Manhattan to visit the Mocha Comics Festival. And I knew it was going to be a hassle, and I should have just gone on to the hotel and blah, 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 because Dan and I went really long, both on and off mic. But I went, and I saw so many people, and past guests, but a lot of friends who were there. And I bought some comics and some books, and I bantered with people, and I faked being human until I believed it, if you get me, because that's really the whole game, right? Not convincing other people, but convincing yourself. Anyway, on the drive to Brooklyn on Sunday, I thought about making this monologue because I still had this thought of like, maybe some podcast guest is going to show up Sunday afternoon at Mocha, and I'll record something and post that, but I'm probably not going to have an episode, so maybe this monologue. And I thought I was going to talk about the Edith Hall thing and suicide and suicidality, and not to be edgy, not to get you worried or anything. Like I said, it's not in me. That's not who I am, even on the most dreary of nights and these business trips, or even the middle of the depression of winter and all that. So not because of that, but, the coincidence of, recording a year ago in this hotel, a really, really depressing and dreary intro, but also because there was this confluence of things that I wrote about in the newsletter that morning. Because I do this newsletter twice a week, which you should subscribe to. buttondown.email/VMSpod. There was an article about Daniel Kahneman's assisted suicide at 90. He's the guy who did Thinking Fast and Slow, this Nobel Prize-winning economist. And it's a really fascinating essay about him choosing to end his life before cognitive decline really hit. He did turn 90, and he decided that this was as far as he wanted to go. He did not need the decline. Didn't need to. Well, he had his reasons for doing it. And anyway, it's a fascinating essay by one of Kahneman's former research assistants. It's in the Wall Street Journal, but go to my newsletter. There's a free link there, blah, blah, blah. The other thing was that Charles Crumb, Robert Crumb's brother, in that biography of Crumb that I mentioned, Dan includes about 2 paragraphs of a letter that Charles wrote of all the things he'll never do again. And because at this point he was a shut-in, he was a psychotic who was heavily medicated, he was living with his mother, and he's brilliant man, but shattered. And the letter's from about 15 years before Charles ultimately kills himself. But even then, he knew he was over. He was just playing out the string. He was reading, he was thinking, he was writing letters, but he knew all the things he would never do again. And it nearly brought me to tears when I read it last week. So I thought maybe I'd get into all that and then revisit that episode with Edith and our hard talk, because besides the intro, I also discussed all these topics with her a year ago. We're going to record sometime this spring for her new book, and I promise it will be a more upbeat conversation than the suicide one. But the thing was, the last 2 days kind of invalidated all that. Like all that comics camaraderie on Sunday and the conversation with Dan where we really grooved, and he was someone I'd met years before at festivals on and off, and I just thought he didn't like me because he always just had this grumpy demeanor in those moments. But as it turned out, he has a grumpy demeanor at comics festivals and had always been looking forward to sitting down and talking with me. And we share a lot. We have a lot in common and a lot of similar interests. We had a great time together. And then getting to see all those comics pals and meeting a listener, fan of mine was also kind of a hoot. And then yesterday, even the celebration of my business self, putting the suit on and, tying the hair back and being that Gil, it all shifted me away from, like I say, being too far inside myself. And it moved me to something else. I don't know what. So I do not have a guest for you. The only conversation you're going to get is me with myself, or yourself, or Robert Musil. This is the one thing I'll share. I want to read you a little passage from The Man Without Qualities. See, every morning I read one chapter of Musil's massive book, which was translated by one of my past guests, the late Burton Pike. This is another one of those Gil tackles an enormous literary challenge things, like working my way through all of Emily Dickinson's poems last year. This book has been absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad I'm reading it in this very punctuated way. Because I'm driving to this show, because I got to the hotel in my car, I could bring stuff with me, so I brought the Musil along. But this was Sunday's reading before I headed out for Brooklyn. It's about the self-educated serial killer, Moosbrugger, who's on death row. We've gotten his perspective before on things, but this was something. There's a couple of paragraphs from that. There was nothing at all crazy or out of the ordinary in what he meant. It was just that the rubber bands were gone. Behind every thing or creature, when it gets really close to another, is a rubber band pulling. Otherwise, things might finally go right through one another. Every movement is reined in by a rubber band that won't let a person do quite what he wants. Now suddenly, all those rubber bands were gone. Or was it just the feeling of being held in check, as if by rubber bands? And later, on the dot, his soup was brought. On the dot, he was awakened and taken out for his walk. Everything in his cell seemed on the mark, strict and immovable. This sometimes seemed incredible to him. He had the strangely topsy-turvy impression that all this order emanated from him, even though he knew that it was being imposed on him. Other people have this sort of experience when they're stretched out in the summery shade of a hedge. The bees are buzzing and the sun rides small and hard in the milky sky. The world revolves around them like a mechanical toy. Moosburger felt it when he merely looked at the geometric scene presented by his cell. This hotel is just fine. It's not a prison cell or anything like that. It's not run down or seedy or noir or anything. It's just a few steps from the ferry across the river. Have a good week, friends. I hope to be back with a podcast, a real conversation next week. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.